We're going to review our policy options that we started last week. And we're going to sort of, come to an agreement that these are how we want to proceed. So what I'd like to do next, just remind everyone that earlier this week, you received an email from us, which had a kind of annotated list of all of the 15 policy options, which included the pros and cons and other considerations of these policy options that you discussed and provided in your small group discussions last week. It also included some of the ideas and discussion points that you brought up that perhaps didn't quite fit as neatly under one of our 15 policy buckets. And those you'll see on the right of your screen, that were some other ideas which may be integrated or you may want to work on in terms of creating recommendations. We wanted to make sure we captured the entire universe of what you discussed last week. And it also included some technical notes from our side, clarifying the extent to which implementing various policy options might require either minor or major changes to existing labor legislation or other parts of our existing labor structure in Ontario. We included these for reference in case that is something you do want to consider as part of your deliberations. And as you see on the screen here, with some of these options, we put in brackets statutory, which means they may require, as part of your recommendations, changes to the statutory regime. We put a slide up here as well to mention the Ontario Labor Relations Act. This act you may be familiar with. It was a piece of legislation passed in Ontario in 1995 and amended many times since by the legislature. Covers a lot of ground with respect to, of course, unions, collective bargaining, and management in Ontario, kind of the bedrock law for that. There's also the Ontario Employment Standards Act of 2000, also amended several times since, which lays out a lot of regulations around worker rights and employer responsibilities. And part of the reason for just mentioning that is that these may be points of reference when you are in your working groups later, looking for solutions, thinking about the laws that are already on the books, whether they need to be changed or addressed in some way, would certainly be in your purview as an assembly. So we've got all 15 options plus some new ones here on the screen. Of course, it was clear from your discussions last week that some of these hold more priority for you than others. And that may have been clear in the notes that were sent to you as well. And what you as an assembly hope to achieve by the end of next Saturday's final session is to create specific policy recommendations, as many as you believe necessary from our options here. In doing so, you will work towards finding consensus as an assembly and, of course, as representatives of Ontario's workers on how best to resolve the concerns that you've identified around worker voice. You'll find common ground where you agree. Of course, there's also a formal place for disagreement within this process. And I'll remind everyone, of course, now and as we go along, that there will be an opportunity for any individual to voice dissent from the consensus recommendations through a minority report, which will be included in the overall final report that you'll draft. So what I'd like to do now is pause for a minute or two and just see if there's any questions or comments about these policy options. Any clarifications that we as a project team could make about what these policies are, about the document you received by email before we do proceed. So let me open it up. Please feel free to either use the chat or use your Zoom hand if you have a question or comment on any of our policy options from last week. Okay, so I see some comments coming in on the chat around detailing point 13, the unjust dismissal protection, and can we elaborate on minority union from Denise? And then I see some hands coming in. So let me get to Fatima's point first, point 13. Fatima, do you want to, are you able to unmute yourself and just tell us exactly what you'd like to ask about point 13?
I just wanted like a few details on it because when you say like unjust dismissal, like what kind of unjust dismissal are you referring to exactly? That's just what I wanted a little bit of clarification
Okay,
on.
okay. Let me just note that for a second, because I do want to offer a chance for others to maybe address that in a way that's better than I am. But point 13, what is meant by unjust dismissal? I'm going to note that and come back to it. I'm going to go to our hands that are raised as well. So I've got Sandra next, and then Jennifer and Amir. So Sandra, please go ahead. I think you are, no, you're not muted. Just couldn't hear you. Sorry, Sandra, I don't have your voice coming through. I'll come back to you just a sec. Jennifer, why don't you go ahead?
Hey, my question is also on unjust dismissal protection. And I wonder if there is any way, I mean, I can't imagine we're going to write legislation, but it's one thing to have something in the labor standards. It's another thing to actually have any results from the labor board saying you must do this, because they don't do it. And well, if you're not going to do it, I guess that's okay. You know, there's no teeth to it. So unjust dismissal protection, does that mean that the person gets their job back for real, or just a piece of paper saying they should get their job back? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything we can do to make it have teeth?
Okay, that's a great question. Exactly. Looking for actually what a good recommendation could be on number 13. Andrew, if you don't mind, I'm gonna let you jump in on clarifying that. And the reason I'm going to do that is because we don't have a lot of notes from last week's discussion on point 13. So Andrew, would you mind just jumping in to clarify some of the options on the table with respect to protection against unlawful dismissal or unjust dismissal?
Yeah, I can hop in and offer some initial remarks, and I would just encourage everybody, because we've got 75 minutes between 11 and 12:15 to engage with experts, well, I'll give an initial response here, but keep your questions written down, and if my response is not sufficient or comprehensive enough, then we can engage again with those experts, because we really want to make maximum use of their presence. But what I'll just say initially is unjust dismissal protections. It's something that exists in the federal jurisdiction. And the idea there is that an employer can't dismiss an employee for just any reason. There has to be what's known as just cause. You know, typically, I think that has to do with like performance issues or impact on the productivity of the outfit overall. And so it exists in the federal jurisdiction and a couple of the other provinces, I believe. One of the, and if it's found that an employer dismisses a person without just cause, maybe just because they don't like the person or because the person's speaking up too much, then they can indeed get reassigned or reinstated in their job. So that's something to keep in mind. One of the things I will say about that, you know, in these other jurisdictions, there's usually a wait period. So you have to be employed for a certain period of time before you can access that protection. So it may be 12 months, it may be 18 months, it may be 6 months. I'm not sure. It depends on the jurisdiction, how they decide to do it, but there usually is a wait period. It doesn't happen automatically from the get-go. And I just want to loop back to something that David Dury was getting on about last week. And this has to do with minority unionism. And where he was coming from on the minority unionism front was he kind of had a view where there needed to be two things. There needed to be a base of freedom of association. And then there could be the possibility of forming a minority union with even further rights. But at the base, you should be allowed to discuss, to exchange, to put forward proposals to your employer. And if it's found that you're dismissed because you've been doing that, then that can be found as unlawful and you can be reinstated. So there's two, and that happens automatically, like as soon as you get hired, So in a sense, there's two avenues here that you can look at protections for unjust dismissals, and you could even go both those avenues. But that's just some initial remarks on that. Hopefully it helps a little bit. And again, if you wanted further clarification, I would encourage to bring it up with our experts a little bit later.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. And I also wanted to just to flag that we've had a couple of comments come in the chat around policy number 2, the app, and some kind of more specific detailed concerns around how that would work. And while I don't want to get too much into the details here, it's important to know that we still have some lingering concerns about exactly how that would work, and it might be helpful to clarify that either from our side or with our experts later before any working group does pursue it. So I'm gonna quickly turn back to a couple more questions we have. Amir, please go ahead, and then Sandra, we'll get back to you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So this is, do you hear me?
Yes, we've got you.
So this comes out of my experience actually, not directly relevant with these policy options, but I'm trying to fit where it can actually. So there will be 2 scenarios to my discussion. The key point is it's somewhat connected with the religious thing, so don't take it otherwise. It's very straightforward thing. So most of the immigrants, they practice religion other than Christianity. So that means they believe in other festivals, and like being a Muslim, I believe in Ramzan and Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr. So these 2 holidays would be very prominent for me, but unfortunately the Canadian government has no provision for me to take these as holidays. Sometimes even a leave would be objectionable under these circumstances. But on the other hand, in our company, what a situation we face is most of the employees, not just me, of other religions like Hindus and other practitioners, Buddhists, they have a concern about this. Why the concern is there, I'll let you know that also. So the concern is they lose 2 of their leaves, annual leaves, which are coming out of their work. Like for a year, they have 3 weeks, which comes out of their service all through the year. So these are accumulated leaves. So 2 of their accumulated leaves, they lose only because the company want to shut down for Christmas for like 1 week. So they will give 1 day holiday for Christmas, 1 day for New Year, and the remaining 2 days they take off as a we have to go for the leave. So some of the employees came out with the objection that we lose 2 days here, and then when it comes to our own festival, we lose 2 days there. So that means out of 3 weeks, we are losing 1 week. Now the company, the reasoning what they give is they have provision from the government saying that for the safety of the company, when the number of employees are going low, we can shut down the company and we can force the leave on you. So that closed all the ways. So now the thing is, the employee here, not just Muslim, all employees other than Christian employees are losing 1 week of their earned, basically accumulated leaves. So there are 2 things here. One, now even for their own festival, some of the people are not even asking for leave. They are going to work. That means that is once in a year thing they get, and they don't celebrate at home with their family. They are like forcing themselves to go to work to save leaves for some vacation period.
Amir, do you mind if I just want to jump in here and just make sure we're connecting what you're saying here to one of these policy options? I understand you've got a perspective to share, but I just want to make sure we're staying on point here with respect to our policy options. Do you see an opportunity to move this issue into a particular policy option?
No, actually, I don't see. That is why I'm trying to say some of the government provisions for the companies are actually going against some of the basic rights of the employee. That is like letting the company close, forcing the leave. Now that closes all the avenues. And the second thing is employee himself being minor in the company is not able to protest or even ask second time, because that would actually risk the job. So in this kind of scenario, what any of these rules, please don't take it any otherwise, because I don't mind anything. This is scenario which I have faced, so I'm bringing it forward. So under any of these, do you think it will fit where we can ask the government to actually try to balance this thing? Because it's a once in a year thing which other religions get, and they don't allow a holiday for that. And then on the other side, they actually have to lose 2 more days because the company want to facilitate a full week of shutdown. So is there something that we can ask the government under any of these things, or any create any other clause here in the policy options where we can fit this kind of thing?
Okay, well, what I'm gonna do, Mohammed, is see if we can take in your perspective and these concerns. As we move forward with our day, invite your colleagues here on the Assembly either to discuss this in the chat, or we'll make sure that we can address this particular concern in some way. And perhaps it'll become apparent at some point, because it looks like there could be perhaps a number of places. There are some comments coming in the chat, especially around expanding labor law, which is number 15. But also acknowledging that what you're also asking is about the rights of workers to speak up and advocate for that and have management listen, which I know is a core concern of this assembly.
No, the
So-
management will listen here, but the problem is the government has a facility for them. One is facility for them to let shut down, go ahead without forcing the leave. The second thing is the government doesn't have a provision where an employee can actually avail a leave which is paid by the company. It's like a holiday because it's not a statutory holiday. So he has to take a leave of his own. That means, is there any way that we can ask the government that some religious holidays should be respected, let the employee go on holiday rather than taking a leave? This is one thing. The other thing is, when it comes to common closure, that is just because facilitating some other holidays, you do not impose the leave on these people because they are losing their hard-earned accumulated leaves, right?
Okay, well, let me acknowledge that a number of your colleagues have been suggesting that perhaps number 15, the expansion of coverage of labor law, might be a place to address this particular concern. There's going to be an opportunity later today for all of you to choose which of these options you'd like to work on more closely in working groups. So just keep that one in mind, Mohammed, if that's a particular policy of yours that you'd like to see pursued. That might be a good place for you to think about joining when we get to that part. So thank you for sharing. Let me give Sandra a chance to jump in, and if there's anyone else, points to consider or questions that remain around our policy options. Sandra, please go ahead.
Do you hear me now?
We've got you. Yes.
All right. Cool. So I'm seeing in these options you've got on the table here, I'm seeing the assumption that there's always going to be conflict between employers and employees. And I think we heard from Lauren that there are actually some employers who work very closely and collaboratively with their employees. And you know, I sure have seen that in some of the examples I've seen. Maybe not as an employee, but hearing from others. You know, and there's mechanisms for that. You know, for example, I think Lauren mentioned QA circles and things like that. So I'm wondering, I don't see that range of situations reflected in our options yet. I'm wondering how we can bring that in there, whether we maybe have like 2 or more streams of recommendations here, or even if maybe there could be a workforce towards a culture shift towards collaboration or something. Because I think, like, my theory of change here is that the real issue why workers don't have a voice is because there's a perceived conflict. And I'm wondering if there's something we can do about that.
So, and just to clarify, I mean, does your point sort of refer to all 15 about the embedded conflict, or is it more specifically around employer-employee relations and maybe how to bring employers to the kind of more to the table?
I think my point is that I think all of these 15 assume that there's a conflict to be solved, and I'm not sure that's always the case. And I'm also thinking that, I mean, our goal here is to increase worker voice, and I'm wondering whether if we reduce the culture of people thinking there has to be a conflict, if that isn't what's going to make the biggest improvement towards worker voice.
Okay, I see
We can
that.
jump in
Yeah,
for
please, Andrew.
a quick second there. Thank you, Sandra, for that interesting insight. And indeed, in the industrial relations literature, there's kind of 2 schools. There's a school that assumes that conflict is unavoidable and we should find ways to manage it. And there's another school that believes that it's possible to have harmonious relationships and that's what we should aim for. And just to loop back to the options currently, the ones that are up on the screen are really shorthand, but if you look on the working list of policy options document that was sent out, not last week, but the week before, that has like a kind of more detailed breakdown of each. Option 3, for example, really touches on employer use of different voice models, whether it's quality circles or peer review panels, all sorts of innovative ways that employers can try to channel employee voice. And so that's an example of where you might find a promotion of this kind of harmonious approach. And option 4 as well, I'd say, would touch on that. And it's really stepping outside the statutory model of, here are the rules to certify a union and here are the rules to bargain collectively and to strike. And it's saying, well, in some cases, employers and employees, whether it's through an employee association or some other way in which they channel their voice, can come up with their own cooperative labor management models. And some companies have done this quite well. In Canada, there's Imperial Oil that has a 100-year-old tradition at doing this. And so there should be ways to encourage that as well, particularly given that some of the surveys show that, in fact, it's true that some employees are like, okay, the situation is bad. We need to sit our employer down and talk to them and let's follow the rules because we don't want to let anything slip by. But in other cases, employees don't want that kind of confrontational relationship. They think they can kind of go at it more harmoniously. And so we should by all means encourage that in workplaces where that works, And so options 3 and 4, I think, could be built upon, with some of the insights that you're offering there.
I think that's a start. I think going outside the industrial relations literature, I think you can also go into the inclusiveness literature. And I think in the comments there's a comment on what I would call universal design. I think it's targeted universalism, or inclusive design, kind of from the Microsoft perspective. I think there's new models emerging that could be applied to this context. That's all I'd like to encourage.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that. And so we are going to make note of that. What I'd like to do now, we are going to come back to this discussion a little bit later this morning as we get to the point where we're going to try to form 6 working groups to look at each of these. And so I'll invite you all to start thinking about that. Amir, I recognize you've raised your hand again. I would invite you, if you wouldn't mind, just put your either question in the chat, or we'll get back to you in our next session, just because I want to introduce our next speaker, who maybe have a bit of a time-sensitive availability for us. So please just hold that question or put it in the chat. I'll make sure that we'll get someone to answer that.